Hello all together and welcome to our webinar about the verification process that simultaneously fulfills multiple safety standards with Martin Heininger. My name is Polina Handziejska. I am responsible for international sales at Verifysoft, but the main person here will be Martin, who will be presenting, and also my colleague Roland, who is technical consultant at Verifysoft. So I will give you a brief introduction in our company, Verifysoft, which was founded 2003. We were a distributor of Testwell tools, and 2013 we acquired these tools, and we also are reseller for some other tools. We have more than 700 customers on all continents in 41 countries. And the main tool is Testwell C++ code coverage analyzer, which will be also presented by my colleagues at the end. We have also some other tools, for example, Imagix4D, which if you have some legacy code, it is the right tool to understand your legacy code. So I wish you a successful webinar. Martin, you can start your part.
Thank you very much, Paulina, for the introduction. So also a warm welcome from my side to the webinar, practice-based selection of functional safety methods and measures in the software development and software verification, software development and verification. It's actually a challenging webinar, as we are combining, or as I am trying to combine several functional safety standards and the selection out of the methods and measures suggested in these standards. However, the idea was created by me because in my consulting work, I have several customers who have the topic to satisfy, they deliver different software, the same software to different sectors, industrial sectors like railway, like industrial, like automotive. And there is in many cases the question, or in all the cases actually the question, do we need to develop the software according to in different processes, so the same software using different processes, or can we develop our software with one development process and verification process and satisfy more standards, more than only one standard? And this webinar tries now to provide you this practical experience, which I made in the different consulting jobs several times. Short introduction to myself, Martin Heininger. I have a strong aerospace background, so my first functional safety standard was aerospace. And in the last 10 years, I did also automotive or do consulting in automotive, railway, industrial automation projects, exactly in the area we're discussing here in this webinar, in methods and measures in the software development, and software verification. As you see, hands-on coaching is requirement engineering, which is one part of it, test engineering, management of functional safety. So the webinar is structured in these 6 blocks here. The functional safety standards with respect to the industrial sections, actually, an overview, a few tables there. And then we are going through the V model, more or less, V development model, starting with requirement engineering and what the standards are saying and what methods and measures they are providing. Architecture, design, coding, so put together all these 3 as the standards, even put them almost together, as we will see. The software verification in general is a topic as the standards are doing it like that, giving some general advices. And then the last point, the component integration and system testing. What does the standards, which measures and methods do the standards provide us in these areas? And finally, the take-home message, what the conclusion out of the webinar. and as Roland just mentioned, in the end, there is a short presentation of one of the Verifysoft tools, which apply to what I'm saying here, which cover parts of what I'm talking here about. So functional safety standards and an overview on the industrial sections. Here is the standard. The 6158 industrial section is general because this is the so-called mother of all functional safety standards, published first time in 1998, renewed in 2011, and actually second edition. And now the third edition should come, and they are just on making the final statements, but this seems to be some time. It should have been already actually published, but seems to be the agreement cannot be made so far to be able to publish the new version. And on the right side here, you have the safety integrity levels, which is quite typical to all the standards. You have 4 to 5 different levels, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the 6158. In the machinery standard is 13849. It's so-called performance level A to E, so it's letters. The similar things in the agriculture area, ISO 25119, also A to E. And in the railway, again, we have, instead of 1, we start with 0, SIL 0 to SIL 4, which means 5 levels, also same as to A, B, C, D, E. Important for this webinar is there is different levels. We can't go even in the details as we're combining now several standards. So the focus is more on these methods and measures as promised, and what to be selected and what is proper, what is not proper, and show you that it is actually similar. This is the main point. In the agriculture 25119, railway, actually there are 4 standards. We are focusing on 2 of them, as we're also focusing on 6158, not on all 7 parts. We are focusing on the software part, and the software in railway is in 50128 and 5657. 50128 is for signaling, 5657 is quite new. In the safety 2017 is quite new there. The rolling stock applications. Yeah. That's about that. Here a slide how HEICON separate the functional safety or split the different topics. As you have seen, there are several parts of the functional safety standards there. I said we're focusing on software. So what additional is around? Yeah, there's the whole topic of system engineering. There is the whole topic of management of functional safety, which is not non-technical. Yeah, it's about responsibilities, roles, organizational structures, reviews, assessments, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Then we have the hardware engineering, more or less, because random hardware, not more or less, it's actually only hardware. Random faults, as they are defined, can only occur in hardware. There is no random software fault in this context, as the random fault means that it is based on physical failures. So there are statistics when hardware pieces are showing failures, and this appears in a statistical way. Yeah. In opposite to it, systematic faults in software, the software fault is there. It is programmed from the beginning, from the first time. The hardware fault is not there in the beginning. When you deliver the product, the hardware is functioning, is working. Yeah. And over the time, some pieces are showing some failures. And you can't predict when this will happen, or you can predict to some extent, but you do not really know, and therefore random. Yeah. And systematic means it is there from the beginning. It's mainly software, which is mentioned here. And as a systematic faults are 95% in software, but of course you can also produce or bring in hardware systematic faults, especially if you can program the hardware in FPGAs or similar things, or ASICs. And you see this in the blue line here. You see in the software here the different measures which we will talk about now: requirements, verification, tool qualification, reviews, and so on and so forth. On the hardware side, there is some math there. Yeah? So for all engineers, engineers like mathematical numbers and calculate things and be precise. Yeah, this is possible to some extent to the hardware. Yeah, you can calculate certain things. Here in the software, it's all weak. Yeah, it's all soft skills. As we are talking about human errors, in the end, humans produce failures. And how do we minimize these kind of failures? That's what we are talking about in this webinar. In the first part now, as I said before, start with requirement engineering on the left side of the V model. I haven't painted it there in the slide, but I think you can imagine the requirement side on the left, requirement engineering on the left side. And if you go in the standards, this is similar to almost all of the functional safety standards, or these topics are here in the functional safety standards, as you see, requirement specification, natural language, modeling, structured methods. So these are the methods here. We're talking about them in a second. And here is the different standards. I put here the standards, and I brought in X means this is mentioned directly in the 615 in a table, the 6158 in the software table that you need for requirement engineering, for example, traceability. The same in 25119, and the same in 50128. So traceability is mentioned directly in the tables of these different standards. If there is an blank here, then this means it's not mentioned at all. So decision tables are not talked in the 6158 and the 25119. And if this is in bracket, the X is in bracket, this means it is not explicitly mentioned in the standard, in the table of the standard, but it is in the description outside of the tables. It is clear, for example, for natural language requirements from the 6158, yes, you need them to produce. So you should have natural language requirements. Therefore, I put it in a bracket, an X in a bracket. The same for 5128. Only the 5129 mentioned directly requirement engineering as in a natural language. Also, the tables in the standards actually have on this right side where I have mentioned here the standards, they have the SIL levels, SIL 1, 2, 3, 4, and they do also statements how strongly they recommend, highly recommended, neutral, you can use it, you can't use it, or more or less you should not use it. These kind of levels they have there, and we are going now through, and also they have on the left side here numbers or letters. And if it's numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, for example, this means you have to argue for each of these method, whether you use it or not use it. If you have a letter and then if you have numbers and then letters, actually the same number, let's say 1, 1, and then you have letter 1A, 1B, 1C, for example, 1D, so it's always in the beginning the same number, and then with letters that distinguishing. If you have such a scenario, then the standard allows you to select one of these methods. If it's 1 A, B, C, D, then you should select one of them. So that's the mechanism, and this is similar in all these standards. So I quit this here. I didn't put numbers or letters there because I have to make it a bit more general. I want to show you that it is possible, and of course to combine these things, these standards, and if you have then concrete questions with respect to your project, then this is outside of this webinar. Instead, I want to go now through these topics and guide you through a little bit and tell you my experience. So natural language requirements, I mentioned here already, it is even indirectly mentioned, so they do not even put a lot of effort or a lot of emphasis actually on natural language requirements in 6158. But the standards, remember, is from 2011. I personally hope that in the new standard, they will explicitly write this sentence also in the tables, saying requirement engineering has to be done or should be done in natural language. We're coming here to first problem. They are also saying requirement engineering can be done by modeling. And this is for me two opposite things. Modeling and natural language requirements does not fit really together from my perspective. And modeling fits more to architecture and design, and you should split this topic for yourself and say, okay, I talk about requirements, functional description of my system or software, and I talk about the architecture, how I built the system. This is the first learning. You will see, I will just have a few more slides on that. Here you see they mix it up already in the standard. That's not good, yeah, especially for beginners who start these topics first time. Structured metrology, this is of course a nice method. Yeah, you should do anything in safety, you should do in a structured way, in a feasible way. And I will tell you what I mean with, or what they mean with structured methods in requirement engineering, with respect to requirement engineering. Decision tables are anyway a topic of the railway, as mentioned thus explicitly, and it's simple, just use in your natural language requirements decision tables whenever it's feasible. Traceability will come through all the tables now. Traceability is actually for towards customer requirements, towards from software to system to customer requirements, vice versa, both directions, towards testing, towards architecture. That's all meant by traceability, from the requirements to the topics I mentioned. Computer-aided specification tools using for requirement engineering, yes, should be done, as we are not doing it with pens anymore. Yeah, it should be done by the computer. But even Excel is a electronic or computer-aided specification tool. So this statement, this method does not tell you very much. This is open. Inspection walkthroughs of software safety requirements have to be performed. I will tell you on the example of architecture what is the difference of inspection and walkthroughs. I just want to tell you it is mentioned in all these standards, inspection and walkthrough. It's both mentioned, and there's a huge difference, and there's some learnings there. So we'll show you in the architecture the difference here. But you have to do inspections and or walkthroughs also for requirements in all the standards. So here, back to the thought about requirements, natural language, and modeling. And there is clear learning outside the standards, outside the functional safety standards. It's just the experience in the industry. Natural language requirements is best to be documented in text in databases, as you need attributes. Here you have the text of the requirement, then you have different attributes for these requirements. You can handle this very, very fine in databases, and you can write in text quite well the what of your system. What is your system doing? What problem is solved actually with this new product? This is wonderfully to be just documented in text form. In opposite to it, the how the system is built. Yeah, this means even things like state diagrams, activity diagrams, and sequence diagrams are mostly, in 80% or more the cases, are actually architecture, system, software architecture. There are kind of differences. Yeah, but here I want to make the point of this is graphic. This is to be documented in graphics. Yeah, and when we talk about modeling, we talk about this part here. Yeah, in the standards. Yeah, not the standards mixing it up, as you have seen before, with respect to the requirements. Yeah, but you should have a clear strategy there and saying, okay, my architecture is in graphics and my functionality is in text, and this is in databases, and this is in appropriate tools. Of course, there is not a black and white, as always in life. There are situations where a state diagram is actually a requirement, a functionality, and there are situations where a state diagram is in architecture. Same to some extent for activity and sequence diagrams. They also can be both. I mentioned it here to illustrate that there are, with this respect, there is no black and white. With respect to these diagrams, so UML diagrams mentioned here, I mean here, mainly they can be both. Yeah, depends a bit on the project, and is actually outside of the webinar. Here for you, what I want to show here is mainly what in text and how in graphics. This is now the summary of it. treat requirements in the standard as testable textual documentation in natural language. That's what I want to forward to you. Yeah, write textual requirements as they are beneficial for testing. You need them for testing, and you satisfy the aspects in this table before, as you're doing the natural language aspects. Yeah, and you do it in a structured way. As you do a database, you have attributes. So these topics which are mentioned with respect to that in the tables is covered if you do it properly. In opposite to it, treat the architecture and the design in the standards as graphical documentation. We come in a second to the graphical aspect, the architecture and the design aspects. Yeah. As I said, the standards do not really strongly distinguish between both, but you should. Yeah. And what you do not need to distinguish so much is between architecture and design. The standards do distinguish, also not that strongly, but they distinguish. From my perspective, actually, the design is just a more detailed graphical view on the architecture. The design has to establish the traceability into the source code, not the requirements. That's actually one aspect. Yeah, with a model, especially if you model your software, then it's quite simple, as you sometimes even generate the source code out of the model. Then you have a clear traceability. If you do it by hand or by then this is the mean to establish a traceability. A graphical model of requirements of functionality does not exist. It's just not there. Yeah. And this was not quite clear when I created the 6158 from my perspective. Yeah, it's not as clear as it is in the standard, or it is now much more clear than it is in the standard. And even the 5128 is not that clear about it, so the railway. And the agriculture states natural, but again have also modeling. So they are mixing it all up together. Again, as I said, requirements in text, architecture, and graphics. Decision tables to fulfill the standards is part of the functional requirements, and then you're fine. So this is the way to cover these points mentioned in these standards for requirement engineering. One more point for requirement engineering, it's just a side step here for this webinar. You can do a full seminar of a day or two on requirement engineering. Writing textual requirements in a structured way, as the standards want to see this. Yeah, Alistair Maven is a perfect example to write requirements. We have here a requirements pattern, templates for writing requirements. If a condition occurs or event, then the system in an active sentence shall, which is a keyword, do something. Yeah, and you have this pattern is even for other keywords: event-driven, a when, state-driven, a while. So you can use these 3 different keywords to write quite systematically, not quite systematically requirement in a structured way, just perfect, more or less. Yeah, for testing, perfect. What the only thing from Alistair Maven, what you should not do is do optional features writing in text form. There you can see even this template is actually older, because as we have nowadays databases, features which are only optional and not in each product there, with product variants and things like that. Yeah, please manage this by the database attributes and not by text in the text form within the requirement, because it's a nightmare to find then these optional features, and these are important. Yeah, to allocate it to the different products. So optional features are not in text, but the rest of Alistair Maven can be used and fulfills quite fine the structured methodology, natural language requirements, which is the best method to write requirements. In opposite to that, we have now architecture, design, and coding. These 3 things. I'm going one step further now, but starting with the architecture and then making design and coding in a slide together. So architecture, you see all these methods are more or less in each of the standards, so they are more consistent actually than with the requirements. Using structured, semi-formal, formal methods, talk about it in a second. Modular architecture, so architecture should be modular, mentioned in all standards. Diverse architecture principles, diverse. This means actually that you have a certain functionality and you want to do some redundancy, and there is one principle can be a monitoring, as one channel is measuring a signal, the other channel is monitoring this signal. This is a quite fine diverse architecture principle. Please do not think about writing software, actually making diverse software kind of. The same functionality by different teams, different programming languages. So things like that in software, this does not really work. This is clearly shown in the last 10, 15 years. This is no benefit. Redundancy in this sense means hardware redundancy. There redundancy makes sense to cover the random failures, because having the same piece of hardware breaking at the same time with the same failure is statistically impossible almost. We can forget about it. But that software developers create the same weak software architecture and then more or less the same software failures is quite likely to happen compared to the hardware failures. So diverse architecture principles, then failure detection mechanisms, failure handling, including failure codes is mentioned. I have a full slide of experience later on in the next slide, so I will show you that. So this is of course important in the architecture. You have to do safety software. Actually, most of the safety software is handling failures. This is very often the case. If you take some aerospace software, you have sometimes 80% of all the lines of source code doing handling of some failures. And there is two different kind of failures: external and internal failures. Externals to your control unit might be some sensor failures or from some other systems which you have to handle. On internal failures is the hardware is breaking, and all the requirements or all the architecture mechanisms, which failure mechanisms you need, you're going to derive when you do your architecture from the FMEDA. So there is some safety mechanism. You've seen in my very first slide or second slide how I separate functional safety, and there is a system engineering and the safety engineering which does a FMEDA, and the results of it feeds into the architecture of your system software. Traceability, again, from the architecture point of view here now, architecture 2 requirements, architecture 2 verification of the architecture to test, to some extent, but actually saying that most of the architecture is not really verified by functional testing. If you do it properly, most of the architecture is verified by review. And exactly what about the next step, more or less, inspection of the software architecture, inspection and walkthrough. And only the last point is a more railway point, fully defined interfaces, but the other standards also mention interfaces, because imagine to do an architecture without interfaces, this is no architecture, more or less, So, and fully defined is a strong word, but it's important that you have your interfaces and that you have your discrete signals defined, your analog signals, and your buses. The main point in fully defined interfaces is the field buses, like CAN, the protocols, have you all the protocol details defined. This means fully defined interfaces. So, and now getting here on the practical experience or the summary of it, some of the aspects I mentioned. First of all, the model I mentioned in the requirements. In the architecture there, we have model-based development, and this supports very heavily the architecture process. As we do not have specification model existing, all models we have are creating in the end architecture. So it's very valuable for functional safety if you model your software process, because you automatically can then generate your documentation for the architecture. Semi-formal notations for architecture means, for example, UML is definitely semi-formal notation. A graphical documentation of your architecture, including the definition of the notation. So if you do it your own notation and you define each element of this notation, it's also semi-formal. It's fine. It's for the standards. It's structured and semi-formal, and if you do it that way, nobody will have an issue in it. Formal notation is then in the architecture sense when you can generate source code, because then you have fully defined your notation, mathematically defined, because otherwise you can't derive software. This is an example for formal notation. There are in the theory other formal languages which are not so known anymore, which also create in the end formal architecture, but these languages are very, very difficult and complicated. Yeah, the modern tooling we have, like MATLAB Simulink and other ones, yeah, where you can create derived source code from. These notations are much more known and more widely spread. Yeah, and for architecture, that's fine. Again, as you see, it's how it's important. I find this, be careful with modeling requirement engineering. Yeah, do really separate between architecture and requirements. Really lessons learned or message sent in this webinar here. Separate between architecture and requirements. Detection mechanism for internal failures, as I already mentioned. So this is important to separate here. Yeah, I define in the FMEDA for internal ones. But do not forget them to document in the software architecture, because in assessments you will be asked about it. Yeah, how do you separate safety from non-safety software, and what failure mechanism have you implemented? This is to be documented in a diagram and shown to the assessor in diagrams. This is architecture. So now shortly the separation on inspection and walkthroughs. As I have not the time now in this webinar to do it in the details, but inspection is very, very complicated. There's even our own standard is there, very, very formal, a lot of roles, a lot of definitions. However, the last 10, 15 years have shown or have provided the experience that all these formalisms do not create safe software by itself. Yeah. So this means a wonderful practical approach is for if you have to fulfill inspections, yeah, then create and use review checklists first of all. Yeah. So for architecture, I have to take another example, architecture, but as we have seen requirements, the same for testing. This process is the same for all the cases where you need to do inspections. Create and use review checklists first. Second, review participants, all the reviewers are individually reviewing the artifacts, not sitting together in a big meeting like in inspections. This is the idea of inspections. Yeah, no, the review itself happens outside of the review individually. Of course, even the inspection think about to do it, but everybody interpreted inspections like we need to sit together in a big group and then do reviews. And this is meaningless. Yeah, it's done individually. We have nowadays the tooling. All the findings are documented in some bug tracking tools, yeah, or in the review checklist. In the end of the review checklist, then you forward the findings to the author of the review. And the author either agrees, the author of the document, like the architecture, he either agrees on the review finding and all the other review participants have the same finding or do not disagree to the finding, then the author just implements without any further discussion this finding. Yeah. And as it's all documented, it's not a problem. Yeah, you see what they have written. And only if the author is in doubt or there's obviously some differences in the findings, then you call a meeting and discuss these topics. And then you have very limited number of findings to be discussed in the meeting. And for such meetings, people are motivated, people are coming. And if you do then a protocol, then you fulfill in the end the requirement of inspections quite well. Yeah. And even for walkthroughs, you do a little bit less formalism here than for walkthroughs, if only you need to do walkthroughs. But I recommend to do the same process here. This is really perfectly to do reviews, these processes. So design and coding principles. We have been in the architecture, now design and coding. And you see the safety standards are all the same. These topics are just the same. Structured, semi-formal, formal methods for design now, not for architecture. But as I said, the design is just a more detailed version. It seems to be some kind of logic. Modular design, information hiding, and structured programming fits very well in a proper design. If you do it structured and semi-formal, then you should automatically come to information hiding mechanisms. Modeling design as the architecture, the same. So in the second part of the table goes then more in the direction of coding, yeah, because design and coding standards, okay, for how you do your design, for semi-formal methods, you may include or exclude design elements, but let us focus now on the coding standard. Suitable programming language to be selected, defensive programming to be selected, to be done, yeah, in all the standards. And the coding standard is mainly driven by MISRA rules, or you You take the MISRA standard very often to fulfill it. And what I want to show you here, or to make you keep an eye on it, these tables are with design and coding. Actually, they're put together in one table very often in the standards here. And this means even the standards do not separate so much between coding and design. So as I said before, the traceability between the design or architecture, from architecture to the source code, is the design. Yeah, the design helps you to identify the source code in an ideal world, or if you do it properly. Last point here last point is the inspection. The point before is tools and translators are trusted, verified, increased confidence from use. This is the tool qualification packages we see in the next table, in a more detailed one. But even here we have tools already for design and coding rules verification. Yeah, and there are justifications necessary, or tool qualification packages necessary depending on the criticality of your system, but it's the same in all standards. Model-based development supports the design process, clear as the architecture process the same. MISRA standard provides suitable coding rules for C, C++. This is mainly used in all the safety critical areas. I haven't seen Java projects, for example, in safety areas. A subset of this should be selected instead of trying to fulfill all of them. That's the important lessons learned from my perspective. Yeah, justify the rules you are using in the coding standard, and the standard does not tell you which rules you have to use. It's your freedom. Yeah, some of the standards mention some coding rules, but not all. It is your freedom. You decide. You justify it. And the methods to prove the confidence in tools and translators will be changed in the new 6158. This to be remembered. Yeah, as this part here, this point here, this is going to be more precise, more concrete. So be careful or keep an eye on it if the new standard is there and it's applicable for you. We're coming to this topic, tool qualification, also in the verification area now. And as the time goes on, let us maybe speed up a little bit. As always in testing, isn't it? Maybe also your experience. Verification in general, and the three levels, that's what I separate here. And you see, again, all these standards have, except of the formal proof, yeah, in the ISO 25119, the agriculture is not mentioned, but the rest is mentioned in all of them. Formal proof, this would be the good wish of everybody, but we have no formal verification so far available, and this is valid for all of them. So, and they are mentioned like that, so you always still use other verification, I mean like testing and static, dynamic and static testing, which is the next point. The static one is already the next point, yeah. Static analysis, which is actually, or to some huge extent, is actually MISRA checks, and I will show you the runtime errors in a second. The next slide. This is adapts to static analysis. Then the point data and contraflow analysis is an analysis which is in all the standards mentioned, but nobody in industry, or only few people, take it really seriously and do a lot or something, or the things we should do on this analysis. But I'm pretty certain this analysis will get more and more important as the time goes on, and the standards are developing, and assessors are keeping more and more an eye on the data and contraflow analysis. I will show you also in the next slide some more details. The structured coverage measurement is also applicable in all standards, means measuring the coverage during the dynamic testing. So the code coverage. Yeah, CTC we will see in a few minutes from Roland. This fits to this point. Again, traceability from your testing to your requirements to some test results, important. Interface performance, functional stress testing, so different kind of testings is covered, is required in all the standards. I would say be careful with standalone interface tests in functional safety. Do always combine interface with functional testing, and performance and stress testing goes together actually quite well. But it's then also test strategy. But you need to do a test strategy. This is here in the webinar, the important point, yeah, in all standards, and you have to handle the same topics, yeah. But of course, depending on the industry and depending on the criticality of your system, you decide what to do independently. But within one project or within one company, there's very well possible to write one verification strategy using it for several projects, yeah. just here in the webinar, difficult to do here an overall strategy. Again, overall verification in general, trusted tools for the verification, increased confidence from use, verified tools. I'll tell you about the tool qualification in a second. And again here, inspection walkthrough of source code here and software design. So do it the way I have provided for the architecture, the inspections. The rest of it, the static analysis, again, so it's started on the top of the table again. The static analysis proves 90% of the projects, yeah, the MISRA coding rules, yeah, in 90% of the cases, the MISRA rules. However, there is also runtime analysis now available. A tool like CodeSonar is very well checking actually division by zeros, out of boundary array indexing, and so on and so forth. So I can only just recommend to, if you select a new tool, new static code analysis tool, try to see how strong they are in this area. Most of the tools are able to do the MISRA check. And for the functional safety standards, the MISRA check would be sufficient. Yeah, but for the quality of your software, please check out runtime errors. Data control flow analysis, I mentioned here that there is new technology available. Additional to what I said, actually there's new technology or will be available. The non-intrusive code coverage measurement or the non-intrusive technology, which will help also in future to do better data and control flow analysis. And as I said, the non-intrusive coverage can also be used or will be used in the near future for measuring the structural coverage analysis. So there is something ongoing and you need it in all the functional safety standards. So please keep an eye, ask the professionals on these topics if you have further questions. Do not hesitate to put in questions here in this webinar on these topics. In the end, we are going to answer here some questions. Professional verification tools include a so-called tool qualification package to satisfy the confidence in the used tools. And it's highly recommended to not do your own tool qualification, especially if you have SIL 3, SIL 4, higher criticality in your safety projects. Please use tools which provide these tool qualification packages and buy it if necessary, if you need it. And there are cases where you do not need to buy it to fulfill the safety standards. This is in cases where you have a SIL 1 or a PL1, a PLA or so on the lower levels. And depending on the assessors, you sometimes can avoid buying the tool qualification package. But from a safety perspective, it's highly recommended to do so, to buy it. And execute it, actually, not only buy it. So last table, actually, here now, the component integration and system testing. You see, I put now together even component integration system, the 3 tables more or less in the standard, is because it's all the same, more or less in all standards, all the same on all levels. Do functional and black box testing, use equivalence class for input partitioning testing or separation, yeah, and combine it with boundary value analysis and do traceability from your testing to your test results, to your requirements or architecture, wherever you derive your test cases from. The point here is in testing area, the tables do not provide you too much information. The testing strategy is a good safety testing strategy or a good testing strategy overall is done outside more or less of the safety standards. Yeah. If you do a proper one, you will fulfill the standards. Equivalence class testing combined with boundary testing results in the most powerful tests. This number 1. Number 2, error guessing should be an important part of the tester's mindset. This is the key. This here is the key. And the safety standards try to handle this indirectly by try to ask for experienced people, knowledgeable people, and so on and so forth. So this is, but still you have not the mindset. The mindset is a quite individual topic, and it has to do with safety culture or with culture in the company, because a prerequisite or precondition for that is a proper safety culture in a project team or a company. So this is the key to do proper testing and to do safe, to create products with only with less or no failures. Black box testing is requirement-based testing, full stop. Yeah, there you need requirements for. Otherwise, you can't do proper black box testing. And the code coverage should only be measured based on black box tests. This is another learning. And yeah, a lot of experience, a lot of seminar topics you can do here. But for this webinar, it should be there. Lessons learned, component integration, system testing, do a proper strategy, the standards, do it all together, similar things. And as they do the similar things in all levels, please use equivalence class and boundary testing with the right mindset of the tester. And then you are proper with your testing strategy, or you have a good step forward at least. So finally, the take-home message now, summary of all of it and some few additional points actually not really mentioned, more or less in between the lines mentioned, therefore put it here in the take-home message explicitly. Selecting the right methods out of the functional safety standards requires a lot of experience. Therefore, this webinar here, it is very difficult. I've seen it very often that people who start completely new and want to be very, very pedantic and do everything correct, then they do too much in the end. Other ones who say, I don't care on the functional safety standards, more or less, I do whatever I like somehow. Yeah, I just do not really strongly look into the standard. They do too less, definitely. Yeah, too optimistic. And it depends on the people's mindset, yeah, in which category you fall. But both of them have problems. So, and what it balances is the experience. So, highly recommend put in experienced people in safety projects, take consultants on board, go on a seminar to get this experience or get the knowledge of it. A consistent development and verification strategy throughout the project ideally supports the method selection process. As I try to show you now, you need a strategy, and if you have it, then it's much easier to select the right methods. Yeah. And for me, I always have a strategy. If I come in a project, first thing is do a strategy and then select the methods. Yeah, then it's getting easier. Never ask an assessor and safety assessor about what methods you should use. Please never ever. Always provide your strategy and the methods selection results. Actively defend your strategy in assessments. So not saying just yes, yes, yes to an assessor. Defend your strategy. And this is sometimes saying, no, I have a better argument. And then it's an argumentation on both sides and the better argument wins. And that's what we want to do for safety. Yeah. This is what all safety standards would like to have. Yeah. That there is a exchange of arguments and information, and yeah, the better argument wins in the end. The selected methods, including the justification why these methods are selected, shall be documented in the safety plan and or the verification plan, whatever you have. Please document this stuff, this information. This helps you company internal having less discussions or discussing really on the point. Yeah. And also for the assessment, it's just great. It's just the solution, yeah, for the assessment. So finally, here are my data. If you want to call me later on. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, HEICON or Martin Heininger. Please follow me or make a connection in LinkedIn. It's always welcome to you. I'm happy to share with you information there as well. So and now I hand over to Roland to show you one of the tools in a more detailed level. Yeah, Roland, it's your time.
Thank you, Martin. So you should see now the starting screen. Okay, yes, perfect. Okay, so now we take, let's say, 5 minutes so that we still have some time left for your questions. So if you have some questions, feel free to put it in the chat and Martin can read. By the way, if it's addressed to me, you can, they interrupt me. And I will give you only with 4 or 5 slides an impression of what the code coverage analyzer Testwell CTC++ is. So we saw a lot of things. So our company also sells static code analysis tools, but our own tool is the code coverage analyzer CTC++ for C and C++ mainly for these languages. Yeah, and I think you know what a code coverage analyzer does. So you have some source code and you have some tests, and you want to see if the tests addresses all your code. And there are a lot of tools around. And here are some bullet points that show maybe the difference to other code coverage analyzers that are important. So our tool can be used on all embedded targets, even on small targets. It works independently from other tools. So it's not part of a unit test framework that does some code coverage at the end. So it's really independent and can be integrated in almost every environment. It works with every compiler and cross-compiler for running code on target, to even measure code coverage by executing your tests on the target. And every cross-compiler and compiler is not only a technical point, it's also a commercial point. So if you purchase a license from our tool, it's not bound to a compiler set or to a target. You can use it for every project you have. It's compliant to safety critical standards, so we can measure all kind of coverage levels that are asked in the standards. So up to MCDC is the highest one that we see in the standards. That's not an issue for our tool. And it also comes with a qualification kit, because in some standards, you heard this from Martin already, that you have to qualify your tools, and you can do the qualification however you want to do it. But having a qualification kit from the tool company makes it easier for you. So this is an optional kit that you can purchase together with the tool or not. As we would like to run on small targets, we have to take care that the instrumentation overhead keeps low. What the instrumentation overhead is, that's what we see in the next slides. Yeah, and the main languages are C and C++, because on the embedded target mark, these two languages makes 80-90% in the projects. So Java and C# are available as an add-on, but they are not so well supported as C and C++. To understand our tool, it's important to see that it works in 3 different stages. So it's not a single process that happens. It's divided up into 3 phases, and we call them instrumentation. Second one is testing, and the third one is building the reports. Testwell C++ is a tool collection, and most of the tools are command line based, so they are easy integratable in a developer's tool chain. So with the instrumentation, you see some tools here. The second box is a white box, because you can do the testing however you do the tests. As usual with the unit test framework you would like to do, or with if your testers do black box testing based on their requirements and they use the final software, you can measure code coverage on this as well. So we don't care how you test, as long as the code is instrumented properly. We can measure code coverage. And the third step, the last step, is building the reports in a format you like to do. So in this slide, I show you in one example how it can look like if we have an application on a host machine. I'm not talking about target now. We have our source code. We compile the code to an executable, do some tests that fail or pass. It doesn't matter. Every test that runs with the application delivers some coverage. And this is the workflow you have without measuring code coverage, without Testwell CDC++. And now we want to measure code coverage, and we bring in the first stage the instrumentation, and the tool CTC in that case would take control over the compile process and leads to a modified code in your application, so that a simple decision like if A is lower than 10 will be modified or enriched with some counters. We see here the same decision, because the application has to behave the same way as before, but we have a ternary operator here, and we have now 2 counters, a true counter and a false counter, that get instrumented whenever the decision is true or false. And that's the way for every point of interest where we introduce some probes, some counters, that are able to count. So this leads to a bigger application because it had now some counters and some runtime, and this increasement of the code, this code load is what we call the instrumentation overhead. And additionally, we create a file, a mon.sym file, it's a human readable file where you can see what we've done with their code. During the tests, as we have instrumented application, this application will create the counters file during test. We can create reports in different formats, but the most famous one is the HTML report that combines the coverage result with the original source code. So in one sample, I show you how this would look like. So these are real screenshots from the reports we generate. So here we see an overview report on file level, a regulators.c file that has some functions in there. And we see for the function lights, we have a coverage, TER, test effectiveness ratio of 75%. And this is on multi-condition coverage level. So we've achieved 6 out of 8. And what is this 6 out of 8 now? So when we make a drill down to lights, then we come to the details page, to source code view of this report. Then you see your original source code with some background colors to get a first impression where was code executed, where not. So we can see in line 8, this was not executed as it had a red background color. And we also see here how the 6 out of 8, the 75% is calculated. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 probes here, and we see that 2 out of 8 are still 0. So 6 out of 8 are bigger than 0, and we have 75% coverage. So what you have to do now, if you see this result and you want to achieve full coverage, you have to identify test cases that will make these zeros turn to 1 or something different than 1, and makes everything green. So the obvious one is here. I think we have function lights. We can give them some argument, a goal. It's off, on, or dimmed. So nobody called the function lights with the goal off. If we would do so, one test with lights, goal is off, then this line would get green and this 0 would turn into 1. Then we have 15 times called the function, 1 with true, 14 is false for this decision, and so on. And there is one hidden branch, let's say it that way. So let's say this function takes care if the arguments are off, on, or dimmed, but what if the argument is irregular or something different, like yellow or flicker? This is also a test case. So we would need at the end 2 test cases to get full coverage for this function. So, but this is only gives you an impression how it looks like. It's not to understand it. So I hurry up. So if we sum up, we have some integration to IDE so that you easily can start measuring code coverage from your IAR workbench or from Visual Studio directly, but you can also do it in your build system. We can integrate in almost every build system, or you can do on your own, because the architecture is so that it's open to integrate it how you want to do it. So it doesn't matter if it's Azure DevOps was a question this morning. Yes, it's supported. We can do so. We can run on almost every target, and it's for all compilers. One important difference is also that we have a team behind the tool. So a dedicated team that can give you support, and we offer all the companies that are interested in a free tool evaluation. So it's there's no license fee. You get for a certain time a full functional license, and you get full support during this period of time. So that's, so we did it in time.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, everybody, and to you guys and to the participants also for the webinar. And if you will have any questions, just let us know, contact us, or if you would like to have a deeper demonstration or a free trial license of Testwell CTC++ code coverage analyzer, just let us know. And we will be happy to welcome you in our next webinars, probably which will be next year already. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you very much and bye-bye.